A Django core contributors panel, and throughout the conference and the days leading up to it, people have been submitting questions on a Google moderator panel. The URL's not great. I don't know if there's an easy way to find it during the session. Okay. Go to DjangoCon AU on Twitter if you want. I'll refresh the list. You can vote on questions. You can add your own questions. We've got a good set to kick off with, but if you want to take a look, add your own questions, I'll take a refresh about halfway through the session. Okay, so here are our glorious core committers. Please give them all a round of applause, first of all. So by now, these should be familiar faces to you. We have Russ Keith McGee, President of the VSF. We have Chris Bevan, who is AKA Smiley Chris, also known for Easy Thumbnails, Django Easy Thumbnails. Jacob Kaplan-Moss, co-BDFL. Alex Gaynor, we met this morning. Simon Mears, who was in the last session, who is interested in Django admin side of the committing process, but I guess that's not the limit of your interest. Okay, so as I said, there's about 14 questions. We probably won't have time to get through them all, but I've also asked all of the people in the panel to submit a question to the rest of the panel, which hopefully will be a little bit provocative and give us a behind-the-scenes look. So I will kick off. I'll kick off with my own, actually. I'll use my moderator's privileges. So as core developers, what has been your greatest joy and biggest disappointment? And is there anything we should be doing to recreate the joys and avoid the disappointments? I'll give that to Russ, since he's got the mic.
Lucky I got the mic, okay. The greatest joy and greatest disappointment is probably actually almost the same thing. The greatest joy is that it happens at all. This is a project where, I was at a prize ceremony for something I won a few years back, and it occurred to me that I'm a developer who lives in Perth, Western Australia, in the middle of nowhere for all intents and purposes from a technology perspective, who became a core contributor on a framework that came out of Lawrence, Kansas, another place that's equally almost the middle of nowhere for technology purposes, that has been used on all 7 continents and is being actively used by space agencies and startups and everything in between. And then there's even the really obscure ones, like there's a group that's using Django on mobile phones to save kids from getting malaria in Malawi or something. So the amount of stuff that has been done by volunteers all over the planet and where you are is just not a factor, which I think is absolutely amazing. The counterside to that is that how much doesn't get done that I would love to see done. The disappointment is that there is so much more we could do if only we had the time, money, resources, etc. That just it's not disappointing in the sense that we have achieved so much, and it's important to remember how much we have achieved. But I would love to achieve so much more. So,
anything to add, Jacob?
I would say the thing that's been the most gratifying for me has been watching people get into Python because of Django. We expected when we open sourced Django that maybe a few people, it might be interesting to a few other people in the newspaper industry, and maybe a handful of people who already knew Python. And we wanted to be successful. We worked to, we worked hard to achieve some level of success, but we never really predicted that, when Adrian asked people at PyCon a number of years ago how many of them learned Python to program Django, we never expected half the audience would raise their hand. That's been amazing. My loyalty is really to Python. I think it's what keeps me being a software developer. I think I would burn out and take up farming full time if if I couldn't do it in a language that fit my brain so perfectly. And so and I think that will be our lasting legacy, even if, you know, as Alex suggested this morning, Django becomes obsolete. I think that the people who came into Python, hopefully, even if they don't find what they like in Django, they'll stay with Python, and that's tremendously fantastic. I feel like we're opening up sort of a whole new world to people who didn't know that it was there, and that's incredibly gratifying. You know, and I guess to sort of, you know, echo Russ, the disappointment is somewhat tied up in there, in the same level of success. And the disappointment for me is that people consider themselves Django developers and not Python developers, and that there is to some extent a gulf between the Django community and the Python community. And I know it's one that we wrestle with, and we're always fighting against. We're trying. We don't want that to be there, but it is to some extent. I mean, I see job ads that ask for Django developers and don't have the word Python in them. You know, I see people who describe themselves as Django developers and don't look at the rest of the Python community. They don't look at other Python web frameworks, which do have a lot to offer. They don't look at other things going on in Python, like SciPy and IPython Notebook and some really amazing things. So you know, I think that's kind of our continuing challenge is to explain to people that when they signed up for this Django thing, they actually bought into something even better, and to keep encouraging them to look at that and to figure out what's going on with that.
It's funny you should say that, because I have a question from one JKM in the list. Are there situations, I'll ask this to Chris and Alex, I think. Are there situations where you don't reach for Django? And what are they, and why aren't you using Django?
So my somewhat, I guess, dirty secret is that since I left my last job where I was using Django full-time, I almost don't use Django at all now. Most of what I do, I use Werkzeug, which is not so much a framework as a Python web toolkit, and I highly recommend everyone check it out. And the reason I prefer this is because partially as a result of sort of what Jacob was talking about, Django introducing me to Python and my growing appreciation for a more library as opposed to framework-centric approach. As a result, Werkzeug fits my brain better. And so I actually use it, and I highly recommend everyone take a look at it, because it's a very different approach to building not a framework, but a web thing than Django or probably any other framework you've worked with.
So I've been glad that most of the products that I've been working in fit the Django framework really well. So most of my time has been spent doing that. I think where it's differed is when we've needed a lot of front end. So the one of Lincoln Loop's bigger projects of recent is a project called Ginger, which is a communication platform, and that is has Django behind the scenes, but not a whole lot of it, and it's also got a Go layer and mostly is just JavaScript running the framework level of it. So, yeah, I enjoy spending my time in Django framework still.
And so, do you see the Django core changing to meet the growing shift towards API-based communication and non-HTTP protocols?
Well, I think it'll do so in a way to try and stay as agnostic as possible, because there isn't just one winner in that situation, and it's difficult to. Well, I don't think we want to push one solution as, we're going to just pick this one and make it work for this one. So if there are things we can add to the Django core that is going to make it easier to plug into different frameworks, then we'll do that. But that'll probably be the limit of it, I think.
Yeah, so this is riffing a little bit off of Alex's talk this morning, is that he was sort of saying that, you know, what Django does hasn't changed in the last couple of years, and to a certain extent, I understand what he's saying, but it's also, you know, we haven't stopped using Linux because we're using Django. You know, it's just a layer in the system. At some level, Django is a mechanism for turning a request that comes in over HTTP into a response that goes back over HTTP. And whatever you're doing on the client side, that hasn't changed. Now, the bit that might change is, you know, we're going to have to support a different protocol or different interpretations of a protocol to support things like live API, live web sockets and things like that. But I think there's a space where it is the bottom layer on top of which you build a bunch of other toolkits. Now, whether that stuff on top needs to be in Django, I'd almost argue it's good that it isn't. And even better still, if we can come up with whatever goes on top, could also be deployed on pick any other random framework that is in that Python space.
Is that the view that's shared across the panel? I'm interested.
I somewhat disagree. Somewhat, not entirely. I think. Okay, so we could do something. We could say, I love Backbone. So Django could say, Backbone is the way you do front end development, and we're going to ship with Backbone, and we're going to provide all these things to magically do really cool real time stuff with Backbone. And if you want to use Angular, your host goes somewhere else. Like we could do that. But I think that would be a bad choice, and that wouldn't be in keeping with our policy or with our history, I think. But at the same time, the type of application you describe, where you're writing a ton of JavaScript and the back end is kind of this dumb back end, like a recipient for data, essentially. That's becoming more and more common. It may not be the majority of websites, but it's certainly getting a lot more common. And especially when you add in alternate front ends like mobile apps, and you start ending up with the concept of what a web application is, I think is starting to change. I think we're having a different idea of what a web application is. And if we're focused, we spend a lot of time focusing on like rendering HTML. We've got this forms library, which it's also a validation library, but we call it forms, and it looks like it's got all this HTML stuff, and we've got all this template stuff. We have a lot of defaults that are optimized around returning HTML, and that's less what people are doing now. So I think that there's an opportunity to make it easier to do that type of hyperdynamic front end stuff. I think you can draw an analogy to SQL in that Django generates a lot of SQL. You don't have to write a lot of SQL. But we're sort of deliberately like an 80% solution, right? I mean, we have these escape hatches for people who want to write stuff by hand, and we don't tell people that's wrong. In fact, we give them the tools to do so. And I think there may be something similar we can do about front end stuff where we do something to make developing these sorts of API-driven, front-end heavy applications a lot easier with appropriate escape hatches as necessary. And clearly this is some massive hand waving I'm doing here, but I think that that's the direction that we should be trying to think about and trying to conceive. And maybe we're in a position where we can drive some standardization among the various JavaScript frameworks about how they communicate back to the server, so that we don't have to pick one. We can pick a standard, or we can pick a SQL-like, but for the front end. I don't know.
I'm reminded a little bit of Simon's talk, where you were demonstrating a few things that I, for one, would want to use in every Django project. So, there's part of me that says I wish they were part of Django's core. But at the same time, that's a dark path to go down if the answers kind of bloat and cruft, I guess, in there. Do you have a view on whether you would like to see Django grow in scope and functionality, or become more streamlined and focused?
I mentioned in the talk, I think streamlined is the way to go, but with the flexibility to hook in whatever apps. If we don't want to get in the way of any third-party apps being able to do awesome things. But I think we also need to figure out how to find the best apps out there and all collaborate our efforts into the one canonical whatever it is, instead of having 50 and everyone looking at GitHub and not knowing which one they should be using. And
Do you have any thoughts about how that might transpire?
Here we go, Ross.
Right, okay, thanks.
If this doesn't involve immortals and swords and cutting heads off, I'm going to be very disappointed.
Well, we see first you get some immortals. No, okay. So this is an area where I think Flask does it very well. Flask is a micro framework, and what it does is even more reduced than what Django does. But what Armin has been very clever about is setting up a registry of known apps, which sort of fall into two categories. There's apps that are known to exist at all, and there's apps that are known and are blessed in some particular way because they meet a set of criteria. Now, I think I don't know the criteria specifically, so I won't go into exactly what those criteria are. But for the Django purposes, I think that is something we could definitely look at adopting. Is that yes, okay, here is a library of here is the Django packages, which tells you there are however many thousands of Django packages out there. Of that subset, there are some that we're willing to look at and say, yeah, it's packaged correctly and it has tests, and we can run it on our CI server to validate those tests are running on some semi-regular basis. And inside that subset, that's the one you should be using if you want to do Facebook integration, because that's the one that most of the core team have looked at and said that's the best option. So looking at the Django compressor, we should be pointing at the fact that pipeline is a better option, if it is a better option, so that no one else has to worry about that question, and be backing it up by the fact that we're running its test suite and we won't release 1.6 with a bug that is causing Django compressor or Django pipeline's test suite to fail as well. Now, this doesn't take much to do. It's really about infrastructure and setting up the servers to make all this happen, and the agreements about... So yeah, if someone wants to sprint on this, that'd be a great thing to sprint on over the...
I just want to add to what you're saying about not taking a lot to do. It also doesn't have to be like one of us that does it. I mean, eventually the core team will probably kind of have to bless it if we want it to be blessed. But like, you can just start this. You can just say in your role as a community member, pipeline's the thing. And you can become this authority and we can follow you, right? We can piggyback on what you do. So if this sounds exciting to you, like, build this, make it happen, start doing these things, and come to us for help and for backup and for that official blessing. Like, we're a lot better at like giving you resources to make your thing happen than we are about making things happen.
So I'm going to take the opposite view, and I don't think this would be an especially good thing. If for no other reason than I don't believe it'll happen, because we've discussed it. We've discussed this idea, I want to say, like 3 or 4 panels running, with specific references to the Flask repository and all this other stuff, and it still hasn't happened, which I think says something. But I'm also just very leery about this whole idea of having a blessed thing, because I'm really concerned that it'll lead to stagnation. Because if 3 years ago we'd blessed compressor, then that would have been less incentive for someone to build pipeline, because it's not going to be the official thing. It's not going to be the one the cool kids use. And I can already see the Reddit and the Hacker News comments, right, about how this one's the official one and it's stymieing, it's wrong in these ways and it's stymieing these other ones unfairly. Because we saw in the free ecosystem, pipeline is now won out, and now we recommend a different one because something better evolved. And I wouldn't want to get in the way of the natural evolution of the package ecosystem or the package economy.
I think that's nonsense. I took up Django because Guido van Rossum said, I bless thee. You remember? Well, what's happened? Has Django gone backwards? It's stagnated?
What's Guido saying these days? I mean, there was just a blessing of Django pipeline, or today there has been, but maybe that's partly because the guy in charge of compressor, Yanis, has, laid down the sword. But there could be possibilities to change your mind on what is blessed or is not. So, thinking about the future, Django 2.0, what's that? And when's it coming?
Django 2.0 is the next release after 1.9 because 1.10 is stupid. And that's it. I don't ever intend, as long as I have any say in the matter, I don't ever intend to do a big backwards compatibility breaking. I think all of the things that anyone has ever mentioned that they would like to do with Django, I think can be done with a minimal amount of backwards incompatibility. I mean, Django 1.6 is probably about as incompatible a release as we're ever going to have had. The test framework is entirely new, and may require some work to upgrade. Transaction handling is entirely new and may require some work to get the semantics correct, although they weren't correct before, so you're probably better off. The way connections to the database work is entirely new and may require some more configuration on your part. These are pretty big things, and we still manage to do them in a way that's backwards compatible enough. Your applications won't explode. You may need to spend, like a week this time instead of a day to do an upgrade, but like it's really, we're still able to provide most of the backwards compatibility promise. So I don't see any reason why Django 2.0 shouldn't be anything other than, the next release in a series of releases all with the same idea.
Yeah, I think that Django is very much focused on trying to work with a deprecation cycle rather than just we're going to break everything and call it 2.0. So yeah, I like how Django has managed to do its deprecation process so far, and that if we can, we'll deprecate it for one unless it's something that's security or breaking. But then, yeah, so like the URLs change where now you have to put quotes around your URLs. Everyone should have been using from future, import URL from future. If they weren't, well, and then they'll have to hard upgrade when they get to 1.5. But yeah, so I think that's a good way going forth. So really 2.0 is everything 2 or 3 generations than what we have now if we want to add a new feature.
Okay, let me ask I guess a different kind of question then. If the magical pony appeared and gave you one wish to remove something or add something to Django that broke backwards compatibility, what would you choose?
I think I would probably be picking the stuff that is embedded at a very, very low level around apps and settings and startup. The settings singleton is the cause of more problems than I care to count. The side problem is that I'm not sure how we fix it without being something that isn't Django, essentially. Related to that is like the app refactor is pointing out a bunch of like people pointing out that there's a difference between your module path and an application path, and I don't know that's necessarily been helpful. It certainly has got us where we are. If we could revisit that at some point, it would be nice to actually be a lot more like Python and actually use a module path rather than this invented, the app label thing that we've kind of got. So that would be where it is. But however, both of those are relatively minor, and so the settings one is one that would be great to fix. I don't know how we would fix it, and that's really the constraint there. We'd have to build a different framework to not have that problem. So.
Anything else from any other panelists?
I think I'd remove the admin. Because I think the admin is a great case of what I was talking about, of its stifling innovation, in that we've seen a few skins that like update CSS around it, but hardly any wholesale, if any at all, wholesale rethinking of what the admin should be. And I think several people have alluded during the day to the fact that there's more stuff we want the admin to do. We want the admin to have dashboards and customized widgets and not just be a list of applications. And I can imagine that might be easier to make happen if there wasn't the default thing that everyone used because it's in the box. I don't think because it's in the box is the best reason to use something.
Specific to the admin, I will mention that Danny Greenfeld is actually trying this, and you're right, there's been a few and they've kind of fizzled out. He's calling it Django Admin 2. So if you're interested in the idea of driving the admin forward, I think that right now this is sort of the best opportunity. And if and when that becomes something usable and or even better than the existing admin, that's probably when we have the argument about whether that's built in or not.
I want to shift focus a little bit to the Django Software Foundation and the kind of meta process of running that. So first of all, can I just check, if you're a core committer, are you actually automatically part of the DSF
You are not automatically a member of the DSF. However, you are offered an invitation to be a member of the DSF if you want to take that up. So it's an optional thing. I think no, there's a couple that have actually either not answered to the email or so it's probably most are. So you are offered a membership if you want. The board is then the subset of those members who meet regularly to actually turn the wheels and make things happen or slowly happen. That's.
And so, can you give us a quick breakdown of the sources of funding for the DSF at the moment?
Sources for funding for the DSF, essentially two. The first is kickback from the DjangoCon US organisers, which is an annual, varies in size depending upon how financially viable the conference was from year to year. The second is companies who have become corporate members of the DSF. So there's two types of member in the DSF. There are developer members who are acknowledged because they are members of the community who have contributed code or related community activities and are therefore representative of what the community is trying to do for that respect. It is primarily core developers, but there are a couple of others. Danny Greenfeld is one. Janis Obrist, who's the Django CMS, ex Divio guy, who's on that list as well. Lynn Root is another. So they are the developer members. Then there are corporate members who pay an annual fee to have the same voting rights as the developer members, essentially. They are companies who have a financial interest in the success of Django and the long-term success of Django. So they are contributing financially to have to the DSF so that we can do what we need to do, and they can get the recognition and I get their opinion. They're invited to their opinion when various things happen. We've been talking about codes of conduct in the Django community. Their opinion has been sought. We're looking at licensing for the Django trademark at the moment. Their opinion has been sought. That's where the income almost primarily though comes from those sponsorships from the corporate members contributing.
There's a question here from Scott, which is related, talking about Andrew Godwin's Kickstarter fund to get South into the Django core. And for those of you who don't know, it brought in about 7 times the target. So do you see this as a viable option for funding the DSF, or something that devs should be doing independently? What would you like?
I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I think it's a really viable and a really healthy thing. First of all, if there's a member of the developer community who wants to work on some big thing and thinks they can raise the money, I think it's a good thing. But one of the things I've been looking towards, and very much the model of the Twisted has basically created a fellowship position whereby they've raised money and hired a developer to work on Twisted full-time, with their primary responsibilities being reviewing patches from the community and basically making the contribution process as smooth as possible and making sure releases happen and stuff like that. So I've been sort of looking towards making that a thing for the Django community as well. So I think it's a thing I would love to see.
I think what Andrew's Kickstarter demonstrated is that we have a big community and we're not shy about putting up money to make things happen. And this is actually somewhat unique in open source. I mean, open source has a complicated and fraught relationship with money. And I think our community navigates those issues a little bit better than average. So I think what that demonstrates is that people are willing to, if money makes a difference between something happening and it not happening, I think they're willing to put it up. So for me, Andrew's project has validated the idea that I think we can do things like the fellowship, like I would love to see future projects towards funding other lines of endeavor, either built into Django or not, or third-party things. If Kickstarter went up today to fund Danny to work on Django Admin 2, I would be ripping my credit card out of my wallet so fast it caught on fire. I mean, I think that there's a lot of will to make this sort of stuff happen, and I'd like to see more of it.
Do you find that it's been difficult to get companies to sign up to the DSF? And I'm wondering if there are any ideas on the table about expanding the ways that people can get involved and help support. the DSF?
Yes, it has been a very difficult process to get people signed up to the DSF for two reasons. One is that the DSF is a US registered not-for-profit, which means that no one except US companies can actually get the not-for-profit benefit. I've vaguely looked at the possibility of getting an Australian Django Software Foundation set up as a not-for-profit, and it is very long and complicated to do ahead of knowing that it's actually going to be worth the effort of doing. So that's problem one, but that's probably the smaller of the two. The other is that it's not necessarily obvious what we're going to do with great gobs of money if we had it. We've got an interesting kind of chicken and egg situation where we can't do anything until we know we have money, but we won't have money until we know what we're going to do with it. So I think the twisted fellowship idea, here is we're going to pay this person for 12 months to herd the chickens. That's their job, and that's what we're raising money for. People, please give us money for that. The other being, we want this specific feature. We're not going to get app refactor to land until someone can spend 3 months working on it full time. Please give us money so we can do that. I think those specifically directed, are going to have a lot more success at raising money than we've had generically asking for funds to support our legal and IP issues, which are, in the grand scheme of things, actually fairly small. Our lawyer bills and accountant bills are not that high. So,
Usually.
Usually, yeah.
I've got a couple of questions I'm saving till the end, but we're making good progress through here. I wonder if anyone has any questions from the floor they would like to ask. There's one over here, but I might need...
We have a mic problem. We don't think we have a second mic, so... Well,
Okay,
so you yell it out and I'll repeat
yeah,
the
yeah.
mic.
Okay.
So, Alex talked this morning about that Rails and Django still pretty much aren't being replaced anytime soon. But I think you gave a talk at DjangoCon the last DjangoCon about what the dream framework would look like if you were to make it. So, if Django were to be replaced as a framework, what would it be replaced with, or what would it look like? And is there a possibility that Django or Rails would team into that, or is it possible that something could test a little?
Okay, repeating the question for the mic. The Rails and Django haven't been replaced. What would the dream framework to replace Django and Rails look like if it was to exist? And could Rails or Django become that framework? Given that Alex had the question, I'll...
So it's kind of interesting. I was thinking, I guess, really on two separate lines. The dream framework I described at, DjangoCon last year was frankly very similar to Werkzeug. Is a thing I would basically build on top of Werkzeug. The thing I was talking about today about a thing that might replace Django or Rails was, I think, a wholesale reimagining of what a framework looks like. I mean, the framework I was dreaming about was basically one without the settings global that Russ talked about. But the framework that would replace Django would, I think, take that slide that Simon Willison had with all these boxes that weren't green and would make more of them green. And I don't know how you do that because I have not fully grappled with how you take what feel like increasingly many and specialized problems and address them the way Django addressed data-driven applications. I don't know.
Have you watched? Has anyone watched the Meteor screencast? I see some people nodding. Okay, maybe not on the Wi-Fi that's already groaning, but maybe when you get home, go watch the Meteor screencast because when I saw it, I had the type of holy shit moment that I haven't had since 2004, and I watched the Rails screencast. Now in 2004. It was a holy shit moment because I realized we had this and no one knew it. And that was what led us to open sourcing Django. This one is worse because it's a holy shit, this is what the future looks like and we've got nothing. Now, to be clear, I don't necessarily know that Meteor is specifically the framework of the future. There's a lot of things I don't like about it. But the way that it has you thinking about developing web applications and the ease of which you write code that lives on the client versus the server and the communication, the bidirectional communication between them is freaking brilliant. And I've never seen anything nearly that slick before. And we do not have an answer for that. Like you can fake it in Django, but you have to know a lot of things. It is not a beginner's move. And for me, the dream framework is where that sort of app is a beginner's move, where the tutorial isn't writing a poll, it's writing a collaborative, a collaborative drawing application, right? Like something really that now seems super complex, right? If our tutorial is building Gmail, right? Now we're talking, and I think someone's gonna do that, right? I would really like it to be us, but it's going to happen. It's a question of who gets there first and who does it in the most compelling way.
I want to talk about the sprints that we have happening on Monday, Tuesday. Any requests, first of all, on what you would like people to sprint on?
Okay, so one is, the obvious one, we've got a 1.6 release coming out, so any help triaging bugs, working through bugs is absolutely, that's the most immediately tangible thing that we can do to help move Django forward and get a release out on time. The second is something that Jacob pointed to, which is there's a bunch of libraries out there that aren't Python 3 compliant, and porting them is something most of them you could probably do in a day or two. So, grab Django debug toolbar and make it Python 3 compliant. There's a nice little 2-day project for you. The third is actually to start talking about these kinds of problems. I see some of the Django Perth users group people here, and we've had some discussions about these kinds of problems. Not to the point where we have a solution by any wild stretch of the imagination, but we've been thinking about the problems and what we could do on Django or as a library on top of Django that would make building Gmail as your tutorial application a lot easier. So, and there's actually interesting because a lot of it actually crosses over to building to Django admin as well. So there's a whole confluence of stuff going on there. So discuss the big issues. We've had a couple of people today talk about what the big issues are. You've got 160 of us in the room here. Surely some of us have got to have an idea. And even if only some of us have 10% of an idea, together we've almost got a whole idea. So have those discussions.
I wanted to relate, I guess, my experience of being at a few Django sprints before. And from what I've kind of felt around the people who are there, it's not a unique one. Which is that for me, I spent a lot of time trying to get to grips with, how the Django project works and how to get a patch committed. And then once I've done that, there's an incredible experience of having to write a patch that works for anything anyone might want to do. So it's like you kind of transcend into another kind of level of developerhood. So, guys who kind of do that.
We're just really good at faking it. So,
that might be the answer to my question, which is I've had those things where I kind of have 2 days where I still don't get a patch finished, and then I'm away from the conference, and I'm just like, where's the momentum? So, do you have any tips? Do you have any advices for practices that we should do, or things that we should fake in order to get a patch through to submission?
I have, over the last couple of years, become a very big fan of a quote by the political economist Max Weber, who said, "Politics is the slow boring of hard boards." And open source contribution is much the same thing. Essentially, the only advice that I can think of is essentially keep at it. There is nothing that's going to happen without continuing to work on it. I think I've got game, but I know I am not the smartest person on this table, let alone in this room. So the reason I am where I am is not because I am mind-numbingly brilliant and the world's greatest developer. It's because I've been bloody persistent and stuck at one thing for a long time. So it's not about being brilliant, and with the possible exception of Alex, who's a freak. But it's not about being brilliant. It's about having persistence. And the 2-day sprint is your opportunity to come and talk to the core team and find out, on a rapid, high bandwidth connection, exactly what it is you need to be doing. Then take that home and rinse, repeat, continue, because it's not that far from where you are now to being a core developer if you keep doing it. Particularly in the last sort of 2 years or so, since Alex got the commit bit, the window from first time we've seen you on the mailing list to getting the commit bit is not actually that long, as you are being persistent in contributing. So,
Is that an experience that is shared amongst everyone?
Yes. I'd also add that you don't have to just start from nothing. You can go and find what patches are out there already, what's missing tests, what just needs some review. That's a good way of getting that initial, how am I getting into this, getting an understanding of it. It's sometimes easier if you've got a project that's already been worked on and someone else is already trying to keep that traction going, like you're saying, Russ, that's a big part of making things happen. I mean, this is maybe a third of the active core development team who will review patches, and we can't review that much if it's not in front of our eyes all the time. So bringing the things that are important to you by writing tests for them or just advocating for them that this needs to get fixed and we've got a solution for it, why isn't it done? Yeah, pester us on the mailing lists, try and get some input from us, and yeah, eventually you'll get there. So yeah, persistence.
I do think that contributing to Django is maybe not necessarily it's not always the best place to start if you're new to contributing to open source stuff or to Python stuff. I mean, a lot of the low-hanging fruit on the Django project has been picked. Most of the problems we have now are actually kind of hard. There's a reason that they haven't, there's a reason everyone agrees that we hate this settings thing, right? But no, it hasn't been fixed because it's freaking hard. All the other options are worse. So if you have a specific problem that is affecting you, if there's a specific bug, by all means go at that. I mean, that's the best way to get started because you've actually got motivation to start it. But if you just want to get involved, you want to give back to the open source community, you want to do something good for Django, you might get a better reward actually working on some third-party package that needs some extra help. There's the amount of good you can do with a patch to pipeline. The number of developers whose lives you can make better by improving something like that is probably like orders of magnitude more than fixing the obscure bugs that are left in Django. So, and a lot of times the bar there is lower. They don't have to support as many combinations of versions of Python and operating systems and et cetera. And the code size is smaller and the test coverage is better and the code is more modern and doesn't have my crappy cruft from 2003 in it. So, it may be the case that when you come to the Django sprint, you may end up not working on Django, and I think that that's fine. I mean, one of the reasons that Django is really great is because of this third-party community. So if there's a package you use that you think you can improve, that might be a better sort of more achievable goal for a short sprint. And we can probably still help in helping you figure out how to run the tests for that code, help probably putting you in touch with the maintainer. If it's a popular third-party package, I probably know who runs it, right? I mean, the community's big, but it's not that big. We know most of the people. So I think that when I see people being successful at Django sprints, a lot of the people are not actually working on Django directly. They're working on the things that Django developers use, but maybe not on Django core itself. And I think that's totally legit and, in fact, maybe like a better sort of reward for your time.
And since it's my job to be a contrarian, I'll just say 2 days of full-time to work on Django is more than most people have like in a month to work on open source. If you want to try hacking on some deep, nasty bug in Django, it's as good a chance as you're going to have to really put your mind to it.
It's definitely
Talk
good
to
for the brain.
Alex if you want to do that.
So yes, I want to agree that working on the third-party apps is very important as well. You don't have to be working on the core. The apps, as I was saying in my talk, I think a lot of the stuff we need should live in external apps, and working on those is critical. But also, Russ was saying the path to getting a core committed bit, you don't need to necessarily aspire to that. The only thing we can do that you guys can't is press the merge button. You guys can write all of the code and everything else. In fact, you might end up with me, and just end up having a commit bit and not really using it very often. So just be encouraged. If you do want to work on the core, you can do that. We have GitHub pull requests. You can look at the track and create tickets, work on tickets there and get patches through.
All right, we're just about on 4 p.m., so I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. Please, everyone, take note of what is said and think about how you can contribute. Thanks very much, guys.